of Christ. And I thought about what does it mean, and just reflect for a moment, what does it mean when somebody greets you with arms outstretched? How do you feel? It made me feel very good. I just saw the bond between the two. Because for me, outstretched arms meant welcome. I love you all. I want to draw all of you to myself. I want you to be close to me, to be truly my followers. That call was echoed by Per Geyer when he said, come to me. I mean, he's not taking Jesus' words. He's saying, you must be disciples of Christ. Come to me and welcome everybody with you. That's our call. Now, for me, it was a gesture of love, of gentleness, of welcome. That is what we need to do in our schools, in our missions, everywhere, individually and collectively. Now I move into a little bit of the background. And my first question is, how many of you have been to Béziers? I knew that. And most of you have been to all the network meetings. Therefore, you're quite familiar with Per Geyer. Now, I'm not going to repeat his history, but there are some words that keep repeating. He wrote, I mean, we have volumes and volumes of his writing, but there are words that keep repeating. And I could give you a quiz like in school, but I won't. Your faith, zeal, fire, be turned towards God. He talks about angels along the way, the signs which we get. He talks about openness to the Spirit, to be gentle, to be compassionate. But there's one underlying thing which he emphasized from the very beginning, because he experienced the opposite with another religious community, and that is unity. Unity in diversity. And as he was dying, they kept saying, do you have any other message for us? Do you have any other message? I thought when I read the letter, why didn't they let him go in peace? But he said, unity, unity, unity. That has been the thread that has run through all of our meetings, all of our existence since the beginning. Now, Per Geyer really struggled or worked hard to preserve this unity. It was relatively easy when he was in the Mother House, when they were all involved in the Mother House. Then suddenly we had an explosion of movement. In 1870, we moved to Ireland. 1871, Braga, Portugal. 1872, Liverpool, England. Suddenly, they were out from him. This was a great concern. How do I preserve this unity? So in 1876, he called the first general chapter. This was the first general chapter. We had just had the 23rd in Belo Horizonte. And he called superiors from each local community to come to Béziers to work on how they will continue this unity throughout the Institute. This was just 2 years before we went to the United States. Now, can you imagine what the agenda was? But there's one very nice story associated with it. They were having money problems. Does that sound familiar? Enrollment had gone down, therefore money had gone down, therefore support of the orphans and the preservation had gone down. Big decision, well, you had the unity, but then you had the practical. What did they decide? Imagine now, those of you who are heads, what would you decide? Oh, enrollment has gone down, well, we're just going to have cut. He said, take more orphans. In other words, increase the number of people you are supporting. God will help. Very shortly thereafter, the enrollment went way up. There's a lesson in it. Now, to move away a little bit from the personal, and we'll go to, we keep using this word chapter. What is a general chapter? Well, the first thing, a general chapter is an ecclesial event. We are in the church. We belong in the church. We are part of it. You all of us are church. We're a visible sign. The general chapter is a visible sign of our unity. And this one kind of scared me as a delegate, because when in session, it is the highest internal authority of the Institute. That's a little bit scary when you think of the implications. Now, during the chapter, we'll reflect on our life and mission in the church. We make decisions with a view to greater fidelity to our apostolic vocation. The general chapter sets goals and establishes priorities for the Institute, usually for the next 6 years. It's a very good model of leadership and planning, because then we elect or select our general superiors. And their mandate is to carry out what we have asked them to do. We come up with it, but that's going to be talked about later on. Okay, let's see right there. What did the general chapter achieve as far as unity and in diversity? Well, we were 37 people. 25 elected members from 5 provinces and 2 regions, and 12 ex officio. We had the diversity because in many cases we did not speak the same language this way, but of spirit we spoke the same language. And at the end, through reflection, prayer, openness to the Spirit, we really achieved what we had set out to do. I won't give away any more secrets on that, because that is the follow-up that's coming next. So, the general chapter was an extraordinary event. The implication is for all of us. All of you, all of us, everybody works together. And even though it was exhausting, I'm so happy that we get the opportunity to share with you the first news. We're the disciples running back from Emmaus to announce the good news. You're the first group we met along the way. So thank you.
You'll have to help me with the distance from the microphone. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I'd like to begin by just situating this general chapter in our long journey from 1876. And don't worry, we're not going all the way back to 1876. But each of our general chapters has had a special theme, a special focus. And that has always been in the context of a moment of time in the world and in the church. And I'm just going to share with you the logos of the last chapters that we've had since some of you were born and since some of us were perhaps beginning teaching. In the late 60s, it was just the time of the Medellin Conference of Latin American Bishops. And some of you will remember that. We call it Medellin. And that profoundly influenced our chapter in 1975, when we looked at our mission and saw it a call to justice. When we heard what the bishops had said, justice is not an optional extra. It is an integral part of preaching the gospel. And so our general chapter then drew from the reality of our world and our church. 5 years later, in 1980, we were focusing on our constitutions, updating them in light of the new canon law. And as you know, the goals and criteria, came out of your experience up to the 90s when they were being formulated. So our constitution, which is really our way of life, was updated, and the focus of that general chapter was the revision. 5 years later, we were looking at mission. What was our understanding of mission and planning? For the first time, there was a little bit of confusion for some years about mission and ministry. But in 1985, we struggled to come up with greater clarity and to call for planning. 5 years later, we came out with the mission statement. As we articulated clearly what we were about, and it is that statement that we still hold today. Do you have it in your schools? The RSHM mission statement? Is it in any of the documents? I'm seeing heads nodding. So that articulates in some way what was the fruit of our chapter in 1990. In 1995, we focused on the call to the community. And that was not just in a narrow sense, at the local level, but a global community. And we began to look at the link between our north and our south, where we were in different parts of the world, and how it called us to work together, to share our stories, so that all may have life. In 2001, we were very conscious of globalization in our world. If we think of what technology has done, of all the ways in which our world has become a globalized world, that was the theme of our chapter in 2001. What did it call us to in fidelity to Jesus' mission, to our charism in a world of globalization? And then 6 years ago, in 2007, our theme was Fan into Flame, the gift of God. And that, Sister Kathleen will refer a little bit more to that later on. So that is the background which led us to our present general chapter, where the theme was on the road to Emmaus, as we know from the theme of this meeting of the network of schools. And Sister Marion has mentioned something of this. As you know, it brought us, the delegates, the staff, or the invited people, to Belo Horizonte. And it's called Belo Horizonte because it is a beautiful view. That's just one little scene from in front of the chapter house. It brought delegates and representatives and helpers from 5 provinces, 2 regions, and our General Council. And you may have met some of the people in that picture. Our General Council that will be ending in November, Sister Teresina in the pink jersey, Sister Catherine Patton on her left, Sister Marie France, and Sister Kathleen O'Keefe. So that brought us together, but the preparation for this chapter, the road to Emmaus, began a year ago when Sister Teresina and the council convoked the chapter and called us to a time of preparation. And that preparation was very profound. Each of these units worked out a special prayer that was shared throughout our institute. As we prayed together and walked on the first phase of our journey, there was a lot of reflection, and I'm going to share a little glimpse now as we arrived in Béziers of what these 5 provinces and 2 regions brought. And so let's begin with the host province, Brazil, just situated in one country. There were the sisters from Brazil who were delegates and others who were staff members. Some of you will know Sister Christine Caetano, who was a delegate from Brazil. Before the chapter, they, as all the other provinces, had had their own provincial chapter, in which they shared, evaluated, looked at how they were living their mission, and what were the opportunities, what were they being called to, what was their vision statement for them as a province for the next 6 years. Now, I just share a few phrases from each of these so you get a feeling about what we were talking about as we arrived in Belo Horizonte, and each province had a chance to share something of their story. For example, in Brazil, they talked about their reaffirmation of their option for the poor. Each of their schools, as you may know, has a project in a poor area that they support. And they reaffirmed that because they are convinced of their need and call to work with youth in all settings, in schools, but also in social projects, in local basic Christian communities. Those were 2 of the flames, you might say, that came from the sharing on the road they were talking about as their desire for the future. Let us visit the north of Europe, where we find sisters in all the countries shown in that bottom right-hand corner of England and Ireland, Scotland, and France. Northern and Wales, and the flags to remind us. There's some of the delegates, some of whom you may know. Their chapter had called them, as they reflected on the same theme, to look at how their hearts were burning within them as they journeyed. And what were some of the issues that they brought and we talked about as they shared their stories? Sometimes it was the need to let go. You heard Sister Marion tell us that, it is within these countries that the very first foundation was made in the north of Ireland, outside of Béziers. And so some of the work, some of the places, the pain sometimes of letting go, and finding creative ways when we are fewer of how to still support our life and mission. And the importance of identifying what are our chosen priorities and how can we focus on them. So that was a little bit of the dialogue they brought. And then we had our sisters from Portugal. And you will notice that there's the flag of Portugal, and the country, and a little country that is a new foundation from our Portuguese province, Timor-Leste, East Timor, where the sisters actually opened a community officially on the 4th of March, a very significant day for us because of our foundress's death. And I'm sure that some of us will recognize many of the people in that picture, our delegates and staff who came from Portugal. What were some of the echoes that came from their chapter? And notice their beautiful logo, written in Portuguese, says, they recognized Jesus, and full of joy they got up and set off in mission. Again, linked to the theme. They focused on centering on the essential. What is at the core of our lives as women religious, apostolic women religious, drawn to follow Jesus as disciples of mission in this century now? And one of the things they talked about, we have witness of it right here, formation of laity in RSHM, spirituality and charism, and their desire to continue that, strengthen it, and to intensify vocation promotion so that we can continue to support our mission with new members who share our life and mission directly as RSHM, as well as those who support it, like yourselves, who are not members but who are on fire with the charism and living the mission. We go to the United States, where we have a province in California and some of our sisters in Mexico. And it is a smaller province, so there were fewer, but the 4 delegates and one who helped. Did any of you look at the website at all during the chapter? Yes, well, if you did, Sister Joan Tracy, who was on the left, was one of the key communications people. So she helped us to share what went on the web and will continue to help us in that. Their chapter, held as preparation, the theme was Unfolding Grace, Mystics and Prophets for the World. And as they shared and talked about their challenges today, they identified the need to collaborate with others in more inclusive and reciprocal ways. And to really consciously place resources at the service of those most in need of justice. And it brings us back to the mission statement, to the call of even back the 1975 chapter. And then to the Eastern American province. And I'm sure I could have given you a test, and many of you would have known that our sisters are far-flung in the Eastern American province. Because as well as being in that part of the United States, and I hope I've been accurate, Sister Kathleen, have I passed my test? Is Missouri on there? And I think it is. If it's not, please imagine how far it should stretch. But we also have the communities in England, in Kingston, in Rome, and as we know, the schools and the communities in Rome, in Italy, and in Neuilly in France. And so, although it's Eastern American province, it embraces across the Atlantic into Europe. and our delegates. And I'm told that it's very unfortunate that the grey hair is showing, but it was a little bit overexposed in the picture. Sister Ross in the center is the one who was elected our General Superior. Sister Kathleen will say more later. So our delegates from the Eastern American province and a Sister Vicky who helped with minutes. The chapter which Sister Kathleen will say a word about that brought out for our Eastern American province some strong priorities which they brought to our conversation and sharing and commitments at the chapter. The developing of mentoring and enrichment programs for ministry collaborators in charism and in mission. Vocation promotion efforts. So we're beginning to see that many of our provinces were talking about similar things. And they are just a flavor of a much richer sharing that came from the province to our general chapter. And now to our two regions. We have a region in Mozambique. And in that region, it's a smaller number. We only have about 33 sisters, all Mozambican. 3 of them were our delegates at the chapter. Their own chapter also had focused on the journey to Emmaus. And some of the things that they brought as crucial to them, needing to be focused on in these next years. JPIC stands for Justice, Peace, Integrity of Creation. And one of the areas they brought up was just Mother Earth. You know, they work to sustain themselves by trying to cultivate fields and also appreciate the sustainability of the Mother Earth. Vocation promotion and then formation of the young sisters, professional formation, and for those they work with was another theme. And our last region, the Zambezi region, featuring our presence, our sisters in Zambia and in Zimbabwe, and our 4 schools from the European part of the EAP network, as you know, have special relationships and are deeply supportive in those 2 countries. They were the delegates, the invited people like Catherine and myself who were on the left, and one sister who helped with liturgy. Their chapter, back last year, had focused on really a certain pleasure, a certain opportunity provided by having vibrant newer members, that gives hope in responding to the many, many needs at the local level in Zambia and Zimbabwe. And at the same time, the call to multicultural living and missioning, so that some of our sisters will be and are already asked to be in many different parts of the world than those from which we came. And I just share this little picture because as we have looked at that glimpse of what came from our provincial chapters and regional chapters, one of the days during our chapter was a visit to our international novitiate. And you will see there are 2 sisters from Portugal who are not novices, even though they look young, Sister Teresa Nogueira and Sister Ana Luisa, and the sister next to her in Zambia. But the 3 on the right and the 1 on the far left are currently novices with us. 1 from Ireland, 1 from Zambia, 2 from Brazil. So as we just reflect on those little stories and what we have seen in what was part of our discussion coming from our units, we might say certainly one of those relates to our vocations, our desire to share our charism with other young people today. Another very strong thrust was to continue to share our charism and mission with lay collaborators and to put our resources at the service of those most needing justice. So I share just that as a little entry into what Sister Kathleen will tell us. It is a privileged moment to be part of this. One walks on sacred ground. We listen in different languages. With the language of the heart is the most important. And we will continue now to hear from Sister Kathleen. Thank you.
So we go back to looking at some of the aspects of our last chapter, our most recent chapter, just so you're seeing there's a continuity here in how chapters. By the way, there is going to be a big test at the end about what a chapter is and how many we've had and what's happened, etc. But I think it's important that you are so much a part of who we are that it's very important that you understand this chapter. And I can only say that probably the next chapter in 6 years, I would hope that some of you would be there, or that some of your colleagues who come will be there, who are to come will be there, so that we are also in dialogue with our lay colleagues. And I think it would be rich for all of us. So these are the 4 commitments of the 2007 chapter. And I believe in your book it says that we are going to share with you the mandates or commitments for the 2013 chapter. But that is absolutely not going to happen completely because the sisters haven't even heard the mandates. And I can imagine how pleased they would be to know that we had communicated this all to the Network of Schools group in Medellin. But we will share some things, I promise. But just so you can see, these were the 4 topics from our last chapter. And they were therefore the guiding words, the guiding signals of actions that we took. Just to look quickly, the expanding horizons, what did that mean for us? It meant that as provinces throughout the Institute, we committed to learning more about the cosmos and looking at how the findings of science are transforming our image of God, are broadening and deepening and expanding our image of God. And now we all know, well, maybe what many of us know, that Teilhard de Chardin talked about this many decades ago. And he was someone who perhaps formed us. Certainly in my formation, we were exposed to Chardin, who spoke of the cosmic Christ. So this also leads us into a recognition of our responsibility to the entire universe. We are not just planet Earth. We are a universe. And so opening that up and breaking that open meant study, discussion, and we are looking at this all under the expanding horizons. Global consciousness has been a continuous phrase for us. Certainly, we are educating our students. We use the phrase to be citizens of the world. We want them to be citizens of the universe as well. But global consciousness means that we cannot avoid learning about and being affected by what happens on the other side of the world, or right in front of me, perhaps. So to be aware and to be expecting our students, of course, and helping our students to be aware, young men and young women. Treasuring the whole for us, that meant looking at our our personal resources, at our human resources, and also at our financial resources, at our property resources. And looking at it not as separate regions or provinces, because as you can see, we are actually organized as provinces and regions with hierarchical systems. And of course, because we're so different in each one of our provinces and regions, we do need that regional and provincial delineation. But we also need to recognize that we are one institute. So when Sister Marion was showing us the picture of the first chapter, I thought, imagine that very small group, and yet where they went all over the world. And so we come together, and chapter brings everyone together to recognize that unity, but also to really appreciate the diversity and appreciate the gifts that we have in each place. So treasuring the whole is a sharing, a knowledge of our resources, and it's also saying we share that. For example, the whole African region, Mozambique, and also the Zambezi region, Zimbabwe and Zambia, are supported by the rest of the provinces. We look to a time where they will be self-sustaining, but that's certainly not a time that is going to be very soon. So the ministries there, we are in support of those. And again, so grateful, we are so grateful that so many of the schools are also taking part in that support and in ensuring that there is a richness there, that there is a depth there. Lifelong formation is just a reassessment, as we do in every chapter, to our commitment to be women who are in continuous relationship, in continuous self-evaluation about our mission and about our charism and about what our next steps are. So we have a lifelong formation document, which also begins with our pre-novices, how they are formed, and then we go through how after final vows, our commitments. So these are the documents. This document in 2007 then helped us for the last 6 years. As we were approaching, as 1 year ago, Sister Teresina convoked in June of 2012, a letter was sent to all of us convoking and opening up the year of preparation for this general chapter. And in it, she confirmed that we would be certainly affirming and deepening these 4 topics. So that's why I mention them, because they were very much a part of what we went through. So I think our next slide is, actually this is a slide of the Eastern American Provinces Provincial Chapter. And this was carefully chosen by our Eastern American Province Planning Commission with a view toward putting together 2 very important strengths, values for us. That no matter what we do and where we are living out the mission in our constitutions and the mission that Gaiac said over and over. So our mission is to know God and to make God known, to love God and to make God loved, and to proclaim that Jesus Christ has come that all may have life. And I know that all of us are very familiar with that last phrase, that all may have life. And here we put it into a different context for the life of the world. But it begins, on top is the passion for Christ. So that is what impels us, and that is what every chapter, every time of coming together and doing evaluation and prayer and review and looking to the future is always going to go back to those essentials. And so we come to chapter 2013, and as Veronica was speaking about how we prepared, we also, as an institute, used the Emmaus theme. And all through, every month, those 12 months of preparation leading to it, a different province prepared a prayer service for us on the Emmaus theme. And so that was very much a part of who we were and how we came together with the travelers to and from Emmaus. So here we have the two people traveling from Jerusalem and meeting Jesus. And just to articulate a little bit, I thought at one point I might actually do the reading from Luke, but I can leave that to you to go and do if you have not yet done it. It's a very powerful reading, and we know it from the Easter Gospel stories. But in Luke, it's actually the first revelation in Luke of Jesus to anyone. The women go off to the tomb at first, but they don't find Jesus. They just find his garments, so they're very confused. And the next thing, in Luke 24, we hear that two travelers, and one whose name is Cleophas, were leaving Jerusalem, and we're talking about how distressed they were. In fact, we're told they were leaving in distress. And they're very upset about what has just happened. And then they meet the stranger. And the stranger says, "What are you talking about? What are you so upset about?" And they look at him in surprise and say, "Are you the only one who hasn't heard what's just happened in Jerusalem? We had someone who we became very convinced was our Messiah. And what has happened? But he was killed. And then, not only was he killed in a terrible manner, but there are now stories that he is alive. And it is so confusing. We are leaving. Well, why was this the choice for the chapter of 2013? And we say because looking at our context, looking at the signs of our time, we have had a church that has been fragmented, a church torn apart by the sex scandal in every part of the world. We open up the newspaper in the last few days and talk about the Vatican Bank scandal. So we are a part of a church that is a human church, and we are certainly feeling the effect of that. So we are, in a way, walking away from Jerusalem in distress and saying, what has happened here? We have continued to have in our world, despite the discussions and despite the UN and despite all the ways we want to eradicate poverty, despite the Millennium Development Goals, we continue to have poverty, we continue to have the marginalized with us, and for some of us it begins to be very discouraging. So we say we are absorbing the signs of the times, we are looking at what is around us, and so we are departing. We are walking with the people who are leaving Jerusalem, with the two travelers, and then Jesus is with us. So Jesus starts to listen to them. He's listening to their tale, and then he starts to, of course, catechize them and shares with them. Did you not remember what have the prophets been saying? What do the scriptures say? Do we not know that the Messiah has come and that he is going to suffer? And is this not the revelation of all of our writings, all of our scriptures? And so they are fascinated by him, and as you know, they say, oh, let's have more of him. Come and have a meal with us. So they invite him in with them. And they continue to talk until the moment that Jesus blesses the bread and breaks the bread. And their eyes, we are told by the scripture, are opened. He disappears, and they look at each other and say, well, were not our hearts burning when he was speaking? This is Jesus. This is Jesus. And with that, they decide, and here we have the two images here of the gospel, the traveling and then having their hearts opened, their eyes opened. And what do? They drop everything and run back to Jerusalem. And so in the joyful meeting, because they actually join the apostles, they go back and they bring back the realization that they have seen him. They have seen Jesus. When they get back, others have said, we have seen him. And so there is that shared collaboration, there is that shared message that is inspiring to all. So this was our theme because this is what we wanted to happen to us. We wanted to move with the disciples, have the meeting, look at our reality, look at the signs of the time, be re-inspired by contemplative prayer. There was a great deal of prayer at the chapter. We listened to speakers who also opened up for us where Christ is in the midst of all of this for us. And again, all of us come back to where we must come, which is personal transformation, commitment to Christ, and the belief that we are called to transform the world. The belief that we are called by Jesus to be disciples in mission. So this is our final, this is us leaving in a sort of a cartoon form, running back. Were not our hearts burning within us when we spoke to him? And this is right out of the gospel. They got up at once and went back to Jerusalem. So we are sharing this with you. We are saying that we have been women who have been touched by Jesus. And what will we do? What can we share with you? I'm going to read you just a few of the commitments that we have put in print, and then we will take your questions. There's one I want to say at the very end. All right. So we are women who have seen the increase in marginalization, especially of women and children. We have seen ongoing developments, however, in science and technology, also an ever-widening gap between rich and poor, a recognition that we are at the 50th anniversary of Vatican II, which changed and transformed our church and reminded all of us that everyone is called to holiness, not just the nuns and the priests, which was a pre-Vatican bias, actually. Not ever true, but a bias. And so all are called to holiness. We also have a wonderful ray of hope, we think, in our new Pope. Francis is someone who is for all, and someone who is calling all of us to think of the church as a church for the poor, but also a person of tremendous integrity, and we think a leader who can bring us to new places. So in the context of our globalized world, in the context of discerning our times and the reality of our institute, we commit ourselves to personal transformation, responding to the call to be integrated persons in community, rooted in God, disciples in mission. We welcome diversity, broaden our understanding and appreciation of our pluralistic world by sharing in the cultural and religious experience of others. We open our hearts to a deeper global consciousness, rooted in gospel values of inclusion, mutuality, compassion. We choose to be more effectively involved in changing unjust structures by engaging with others in dynamic partnerships for mission through, these are the three key words, collaboration, networking, and advocacy. Collaboration, networking, and advocacy. And then we move into a series of actions, which I will not be sharing with you. But for sure, this group, you are, as Dr. Brian Johnson at Marymount London used to say to the faculty, we are the new sisters. We are the sisters now. So we share with you what we have as a community come to, but we also want you to feel that you are also called to this. And it's not just you in our schools. We are sharing this with all of the places that we work, the social outreach programs that we have, the work with our immigrants, all of the colleagues and all of our collaborators. We want to share this approach and this being for people. So the Spirit impels us to listen and learn from the voices from below that are silenced. We want to open our hearts ever wider to our marginalized sisters and brothers, especially women and children, as we journey with all who share the same vision and commitment to our earth and to her peoples. And I end with this quote from Gaiac. We cannot rest until Jesus Christ is fully formed in each one of us. It is up to us to work with Jesus Christ to transform the world. This is our vocation. Thank you.
First of all, we open the floor now to questions. If anyone is thinking of a question they would like to ask. But before we do that, I have to say to the three of you, I have been sitting up here looking at those three portraits at the back. And I don't know if it is my imagination or what, but when I first came in here this morning, I looked at them and I said to Sister Marion, I said, Mother Butler doesn't look too happy. I wonder what she's thinking, you know? And as you were speaking, I was looking at the pictures and I was like, you know what? They're smiling. So I'm going, and you're ending that last picture that you put up there. Marion began with the image of Christ with his hands out. And, microphone. She brought it to Béziers. Bianca's picture of Gaiac with his hands like that. And your last frame is the picture of Amos, who's supposed to be us, leaving, and the first person, who is a woman, her hands are like that. And I thought, wow, that is terrific. But thank you so much. I can just imagine those three people back there saying to you right now, well done, good and faithful. You can go back to a chapter anytime and come back and tell us about it. Okay, any questions? Sarah?
Thank you very much for a very informative set of presentations. I'm sure we were all very appreciative, particularly of getting the history of the chapters and the focus of the chapters over the past 25, 35, 48 years, was it? 75. My question is on the role of the schools going forward. Sister Kathleen at the end spoke about the transformational zeal which we bring with us on this journey from Emmaus, and I would like to ask how the religious see the schools in terms of that transformation.
Sarah, thank you so much for asking me that question. I'll pay you later. No, teasing. Truly, this is, I think, why we're all here, because I think we see so much that this is actually the reason we have schools. There are schools all over the world, and what we think we have in the, can you hear me? Is this on? Yes. So what we have in our charism, and I don't mean to make this such an exceptionalist approach, because we are literally the gospel people, but we are calling one another to live that very authentically, and to do that, as we pointed out, the church has in the last 50 years recognized in new ways also our commitment to train young people to be aware of the world and to be committed, as some of our mission statements actually indicate, that we're educating young people to believe they can and must shape and change the world. So, to me, this is a great antidote to the adolescent ennui and to the sort of, well, you know, how bored can I be? This is such an exciting call. This is that we really believe that we have the ability to change the world, that we are called we have a very high calling. And I often think that we fail our students who are looking desperately for meaning and are not finding it in their cultures very often. So I think we have something so special and so important to give in transmitting this faith, this wonderful faith that we have, which is full of optimism and hope. So I think it's a marvelous vocation. I think that a school is a wonderful place to be. One of our speakers said to us, it really doesn't matter where we are. It matters that wherever we are awake. And we are looking around and we are seeing, is there a need? Are there needy people here? Is someone suffering? And so it can be done in very small ways and in very big ways. I also think that we're going to hear a lot more tomorrow about the UN, and that is one of the ways that we are thinking we will be collaborating, networking, and actually, especially the major word is advocacy. So how can we change the world in small ways and big ways? But I think it's such a wonderful opportunity to be with young people and to have that opportunity to share that with them.
I guess I'm wondering if GAIAC is speaking to us through the years with this idea of the first chapter having taken place in 1876. Obviously, it's been a successful pattern for bringing the RSHM as a community, as an international community through the generations. And as we've been meeting as a network for the past few years, we've also been talking about how will the network sustain itself as it moves toward the future, with the possibility that many schools like ours will eventually be without RSHM guiding us and living with us in community. So I'm wondering if there is actual openness within the congregation to make a stronger connection with us in the schools, or if maybe it's up to the schools to follow the pattern that the chapters have set for you and use that as a pattern for guiding us along the road to the future. It's a question and a comment. I'm not sure where I'm going with it, but is GAIAC speaking to us? Is GAIAC saying, it's on your shoulders now to get something organized?
Well, of course I believe that GAIAC is speaking to us all the time, because his message is very central. Be turned towards God. He's not saying just the nuns. I said to the other sisters the other day, he loved working with lay people. They were much less complicated than the nuns. But yes, the whole thrust now is the vocation of the lay people. By the way, we are also lay people according to the church. But the vocation of the laity, really training them, encouraging them, moving them to assume their responsibility in the church. As by your baptism, we say we are priests, prophets, and just about okay. Priest, prophet, and kings. Well, then I guess that's why I didn't want to say it. Well, anyway, we've been called to that. We've been called to I had a real discussion recently with somebody about holding, say to a girl in baptism, you're called to be a priest because you'll never be. And it's the whole concept of a priestly ministry which is open to all. And the king, he told me, was for the kingdom, not for the royal king. But anyway, Susan, yes, I think we're hoping by sharing with you what we're doing to collaborate, to urge, to get a sense of urgency into the schools and into our ministries that we need to form and that it's up to you to continue. We will not be around forever, and that's not negative. That's really giving you all the opportunity to rise up, to assume your responsibility, not responsibility so much as to assume your mission. And again, we say, we do it, this is the RSHM way of Bernie Perry-Gayak. Do it with love, outreach, appreciation of life, but to be constantly turned towards God, listening. Is that?
Yes, I was very struck by something here. This was all very enjoyable and informative for all of us. But one thing that I thought over the years, actually, coming to these meetings, is the obvious movement here to turn more of the responsibility, etc., to the lay people because the sisters are going to be leaving. But what I saw here were two commitments to vocation, to encouraging vocation. And when I, of course, so long ago, in high school, the encouragement of vocation was automatic, and many girls that I graduated with in the 1960s went on to become sisters who subsequently left in the wake of Vatican II. But here, I'm looking at those four young women in the one film there and thinking, whoa, wait a minute, are you being overlooked here very much? Because we don't hear a lot about encouragement of vocations in our schools, and I don't even know how you approach it in our day and age. And so I'm just wondering what the specifics are, how you plan to do that.
I can't give you too many specifics because we're talking about many different parts of the world. But the very fact that it has come through so strongly means that each of our units, each province and each region, will be getting together to say, how are we going to implement what came out of the general chapter? And I can guarantee you that there will be specific things that will be coming out depending upon where you are. In the Eastern American province, Sister Kathleen, you wanted to say something there, and I'll pass the microphone to you. But I know some provinces are having their own meetings in August or September or October. And as they begin to look to plan, they'll begin to work out how are we going to address that. And hopefully they will be sharing it with their schools, their other institutions, to say, how can we engage you in it? Because there is a way in which some of our young people can be the best advocates, you might say. And so, the actual going out, receiving, talking to other young people is a key way. Sister Kathleen will tell you something in the EA.
Yes, just very quickly, we do have two sisters who work in this ministry, who are one part-time, one full-time, who are actually involved in outreach programs to attract new members. Number one, that's basically something that we've always had, but we have let's say, reinvigorated this approach, and that's one thing. But we actually plan. They are both going to be visiting. And the European schools and the schools that are in our province, New York, and the schools in Europe will be we're going to ask that you will open your doors to them when they come, and they will want to speak to faculty and to staff and perhaps to parents, and then of course to children about this, first of all about Christian vocation, about the call to holiness. But yes, also specifically about the call to consecrated life. And it's very interesting. There are, in some communities, there are many vocations. And we know that in some communities that have perhaps adhered more to the way we all looked before Vatican II, there is an interest among young people in the fact that they are living in a little bit more of the semi-cloistered way that we did live. And there's an attraction to that. And actually, some of us can understand it because we were attracted to that life. It was very clearly visible and quite different. So we know there are so many reasons why the call to consecrated life has not been as vibrant. But we are eager to look at that, to talk to young people, and actually to see how and whether there is a shift. Some people believe that with Pope Francis, there will be actually a new feeling about the church, and perhaps full-time church work might be more attractive again. There has been sort of a shadow over some parts of the church, and I think that certainly there's with the rest of our culture, calling people to very different values, it's more difficult. Our province has also been having prayer days, about every 6 weeks. We invite young women to come from, and they're coming from different parts of our ministry to different parts of either in New York City or in Tarrytown to a prayer day. And that has been very successful. When I say successful, they seem to really enjoy it, and a number of people come back to this. There is definitely a desire for deepening spirituality among, that is one of the signs of our time. As much as there is an anti-religion, there's also a desire for more inner values and for a connectedness to God.
I have a question about sort of the history of RSHN and the history of your chapters. I imagine when you go through a chapter and develop these commitments, do you begin the next chapter with an evaluation of how closely you have reached them? And if so, thinking back on the 4 that you mentioned from 2007, which ones of those do you feel you've had the greatest success with, and which ones of those do you feel you are still most challenged by?
Let me just say 1 or 2 things, and then I'll pass on the microphone. One thing, for example, the 3rd one was treasuring the whole. And that really called for a planning process to look at how we could make the best use of our human and financial resources for mission, without just looking in the narrow area of province or region. And so there was a huge that planning process. Each commitment, each province, each region worked on it. And that was a process that went through the 6 years, and really it was evaluated and there was sharing on it. So that's one very concrete thing. For example, the second one that talked about, that mentioned specifically justice, peace, integrity of creation, and the stand against human trafficking, and the work of the NGO, and the development of that. There was a reflection on what have we been able to do. People have shared, have talked about it, have valued it, and I think that's why now there's going to be a very strong call for that to be strengthened, and certainly that's an invitation to think through and work through, what can we learn from these last 6 years that will help us to go forward more effectively in collaborating, in networking, and in advocacy. So yes, those are just 2 examples.
I think just one more example. The trafficking of women, which is such an important area, and our focus on that came out of the last chapter. And we work now with a group of 35 congregations in the greater New York area to support, and we actually have a safe house. So that is a very important part of what we as congregations have committed to, and that is the sharing of our resources and doing something very active. So that was one of the areas that we had said we wanted to increase, and we did. We also decided that we wanted to open an international novitiate rather than having novitiates in every province. And that, what you saw in the photo, is that we agreed that the country of Brazil and the city of Belo Horizonte would be the place for our international novitiate. you can imagine how some of us felt when we thought, isn't it hard enough to find young women interested in religious life? And then we're going to tell them, by the way, you'll be spending 2 years in Brazil. And then we found out that many people thought that was just wonderful. And this is an international congregation, so that is, we have just recommitted to that. We just made another commitment to it. And we also, but the photograph you saw was actually after a very lengthy visit with the sisters in the novitiate, and we were really profoundly moved by them. They are from as you saw, the differences in their background and their commitment, their joy, and their recognition of how privileged they are to be in this international congregation was very moving for us. So it was a kind of, so anyway, we are going forward for the next 6 years. Remember, we'll meet again in 6 years and figure out how we're doing on this end. But thank you for asking the question, because yes, part of it is, we actually have been in a process of intense follow-up with the planning, professional planning people that we have been working with, and have reams of paper on how we're doing on each one of these. We did not want to bring those to you.
Mary Ellen, did you have a question? Oh, I'm sorry. Sarah.
Sister Kathleen, as we are, as we're preparing student leadership opportunities for our students, and also keeping in mind the theme of the general chapter and of this conference, I think as teachers we're always looking for ways to effectively communicate the mission of the RSHM to our students. Also, so that it becomes a framework for the development of their leadership skills and motivates them to be agents for change on their own. So to that end, would you have any suggestions about how we could create a direct link between our students and members of the RSHM community? I really think that motivates them a lot, or opportunities for them to learn directly from members of the community at some of the gatherings that they do for their student leadership retreats.
I see some heads, agreeing with this question, and there's not a simple answer, because you know that we are diminishing ourselves. That's one of our signs of the time. But we do have sisters who are, actually we have a sister in London, on the London campus, Sister Kathleen Connell, who is available, and one of the reasons she's doing her research, because she's one of our writers on heritage, but she loves to talk about the stories, and she will be happy to share. And I think she is someone who would be willing to do some traveling. She also worked with our novices, so she was in Belo Horizonte, and so that is one person. And I again point to my colleague here, Sister Marion, who will while she's leaving Béziers, and she has been missioned to Marymount Paris. One of her roles there will be to accompany, if schools would like to have her go with them to Béziers, because we will need more people in Béziers. The way Béziers is being reconstructed, we probably will need a few more people to go, and not to stay there for good, but to go with groups. And also, as Sister Maureen said, Sister Marion travels. So that's one thing. There may be other suggestions that you have on this, and I'm going to just pass this to somebody else.
Just as one small example that we heard about while we were in Brazil, our Brazilian province has developed an online course in Portuguese about our spirituality and charism. And there was some interest in sharing that with other groups, perhaps getting things translated. But there is one very interesting new way of trying to think of broadening the channels of sharing and communication.
Well, Sister Veronica already took my idea of having like an online course or something like that, in which we may have that formation for laity, and special for the religion teachers and also for the students. So it is a great idea. Another idea can be that we may give the options to our students that probably at the end of their school years, they may offer a year for service in the schools around the network community. So it is a very nice option in which they may find out how our NANSA and the RSHM group works, and that's like the way of how we say to capture to capture our students, for example.
Thank you. The Eastern American province has also developed a volunteer program, and it has been based in the New York area, where we have about 37 volunteers now working at our Marymount Convent. But we are just moving as of next month into the second phase, which is that we will be sending 2 young people right out of college to work with the poor in Immokalee, Florida, and working with the undocumented, working with the in that whole area with one of our sisters, but also in an area where there are many volunteers. So that idea of a year of volunteer, we've sort of settled on that post-college experience. But certainly, I know that we have sent Marymount London, had a student group that had an immersion experience in the very large 700-student girls' school in Zambia for about 10 days a couple of summers ago. And I believe there are lots of other examples from Rome and from different parts of the schools that have done some volunteer programs. I do want to go back, though, to Sister Veronica's mentioning of the Brazilian Sister Christine Catano has done some marvelous things and has also opened it up for others. There is a cartoon about Gaiac. There's a cartoon about abalone. These are educational programs that are geared toward younger children, and they're very fine. They're all in Portuguese. But we have said, and as is this marvelous program, the formation program for staff is online in Portuguese. There's also, and some of us laughed at this at first, and then the more we heard, we thought it was great. There's, for the little children, there's actually a Gaiac doll and an abalone doll. And they were explaining to us in Brazil that they are committed, they're extremely committed to the founders and to educating people about the founders. So they have decided that affection, that a child's affection for a doll is how they tell the story. They tell the Gaiac story, the story of caring about the women who were being abused and were actually trafficked women at the time, and their children was his desire, and then how he started a school. So it's amazing to me. And there's also an abalone doll. So I'm just saying that they have been very creative in ways to incorporate into the curriculum some of the history and the mission. And I think Portugal is doing the same. I want to point out, actually, there are 2 sisters here from the Portuguese province as delegates from, I believe it's from Fatima and from Porto. So Sister Casimira and Sister Alicia, could you just stand so people could see you? Maria Elise, where are you? Casimira and Maria Elise. So thank you, yes. And I want just to say how I have been, since the time I first met our Portuguese sisters, I am in very great admiration of the Portuguese province and the Brazilian province. The Portuguese province came first, of course, and with colonialism went to Brazil. But the Portuguese province has developed excellent criteria. They have wonderful systems of evaluating every year. They have a planning process every year. Faculty stay, it's always been fascinating and amazing to me that faculty stay for 2 weeks, maybe even 3, as the school year is ending. They stay on to do evaluation and planning for next year. And their planning is very wonderful. So we will enjoy speaking to the sisters and to Seraphin and Joanne, and I'm sure there are others as well who are here from the schools.
And just as a follow-up in a general sense, there are great treasures hidden within the group here. And I think if we could just break them open, because some schools, like the whole situation in Brazil with Gaiac and how the programs they have developed little children. I'm sure there are equivalent programs, things that really work in your schools. And my call would be advertise them and share them. Because, why reinvent the wheel? And we're all educators, and the treasure is there. Just treasure the treasure.
Any more questions or comments? Mary Ellen?
In a way, it flows from the serendipity of all of these conversations, and it's a bit presumptuous, but in the talk about vocation, perhaps if there could also be an entree for a short commitment that might be linked to first-year teachers or something that we are very passionate about. But because of our culture, we may not make a life commitment, but we might make a 2 to 5 year commitment, particularly in correlation with teaching, so that we could link all of this formation. I think all of our schools generate young people who indeed go on to college, but would be ready the moment they were finished with college to serve in a community setting, maybe grouped, within the countries, formed in both our charism and serving the schools that are most in need, then living many of your principles, which they can't commit to perhaps for their life, but they can commit to for passionately, and then would share thereafter. So as you go back and think about this, if any of us could work with you on something that might be temporary isn't the word I want, but do you see where I'm coming from? Because we have vocation too, but it might not be exactly in the same way, but it would be to what you are doing.
Just to add, I think that you have this moment and these days are very times to talk about that and to share with one another, because it's going to come from you. These ideas, I think, will come from you. You are the creative thinkers that are running the schools, and you're doing fabulous jobs wherever you are. But we will be very interested for you to be talking about this and maybe coming up with something that we can really do with you.
All right, any more questions from anyone? Comments? Okay, well then I think we invite Jackie, Lillian, and Chris to please come up. And Anna Maria.
First, I want to thank Sister Kathleen Fagan and to present to you, but I have some words first. And that is, when we were looking at From the Road to Emmaus, we can all resonate with the leading part in terms of the issues that you so eloquently highlighted, that are painful and real. But what hits me so much, or strikes me, is the return. And this is what I think for you, young sisters, you represent so much, is the fidelity to what's really important in the core of the RSHM. You definitely have, in such an exuberant way, the zeal of Gaia, and your heart was on fire. But most importantly, I think what you also represent is you keep our feet to the fire. Our hearts are on fire with passion, but keeping feet to the fire about really seeing in the world through social justice what we'd rather not see. And you embody that. And so I just want to thank you on behalf of all of us and to present you with this gift.
Lillian just said, Jackie is from Marymount, Los Angeles,
And now Lillian is from Marymount School of New York.
Sister Mary, when you were describing the image of Gaiac with the arms raised and the gentle love and you spoke of welcome and compassion, actually the person who came in mind was you. Because everybody who has gone to Béziers, have you seen the arms high up and the welcome and the gentle love? And the thought of you going around the world with your suitcase, and I hope you bring his heart with you in the suitcase, is really a beautiful one, because you will be carrying the gift of Béziers wherever you go. But I know the Béziers you're going to bring is the one from your heart. And we all really appreciate that. So, on behalf of everyone here, and in particular Marymount School of New York, who welcomed you a couple of years ago, a little gift from our classroom across the street.
And Christine from Cuernavaca.
Sister Veronica, thank you so much for what you shared with us. I don't know about the rest of you, but all of the objectives and the ideas that each of the provinces brought are things we can certainly apply in our schools. And the most important thing I think you said was that the language of the heart is the most important. And those of us that work with young children, and especially with adolescents, the language of the heart is extremely important. So thank you so much for sharing everything you did with us.
And finally, thank you to all of you. You have been a terrific audience. And from this vantage point, watching you, it has been a pleasure to be up here and see how engaged you were in what these three women were saying. And again, I only have one word for you three, and it's wow. You were great. Sister Maureen also deserves a big round of applause. She was a great master of ceremony. Before we go on the 30-minute recess, we have several announcements as well. First of all, inside the pouch, at the back of your name tag, you may find the username and the password for the internet access here at the school in case you need to log on the internet to get connected with your schools. And the translation gear, the idea will be to keep it all through the day, and then you will give it back at the end of the afternoon talk with Father Vicente Duran from Universidad Javeriana in Bogotá. So after Father Vicente's talk, you may please return the translation gear at the back to the people responsible. We also would like to thank the Marymount School community. Ana Maria invited all the teachers who wanted to participate in the talks, and I see that a lot of them did, and we thank you very much for that as well. And this afternoon we have a program that is a sightseeing tour, and after that we're going to stop at a typical restaurant. It's not optional. Well, no, it's not an optional tour, but if by any reason you consider that you are not going and that you would need transportation right after this afternoon's talk, you may, Maria Clara, would you please stand up, and Catalina Caicedo, you please let Maria Clara and Cata know if by any reason you consider that you are not going to the tour this afternoon, because then they will organize transportation for you back to the hotel. I think recess is going to be served, since it was kind of cold this morning. It's going to be, so it's going to be in the back corridor. So you leave the auditorium through the back door, and then, and I forgot to tell you something else. We have the ladies' room and the men's room. The ladies' room is on my left-hand side, and the